we've just learned, in fact, the judge handed down a sentence of 50 months for Sean Diddy Combs, less than what prosecutors wanted, but much more than his defense team wanted.
Much in that target range, that central target range that we were talking about. People were talking about 5 to 7 months. And that would be what a judge would do, we presume, when he doesn't want the sentence to be perhaps overturned on an appeals court. And it would seem somewhere in the middle is always the safest approach.
Absolutely. Let's bring in Rich Schoenstein. He is the expert on all things, everything related to these trials. Rich, I have never in my life seen a sentencing display like we saw today, right? More people spoke from the defense side today than they did during the trial. Diddy wrote a letter to the judge. They played this edited, basically a mini documentary showing what a family man and philanthropist he was. And then he did address the court. Was any of that impactful?
Everybody got a turn. It was like a wedding where everybody stands up and makes a toast. I don't think ultimately it was impactful. I assume the judge knew what the sentence was going to be going into today, and at the end of the day, that is the sentence. I thought some of what was said was helpful. I thought some of what was said wasn't helpful. Overall, I thought there was too much.
It does strike you as odd that a man who didn't put up a defense, didn't put up a single witness, 30-minute defense practically, and then the entire day is spent on this. I always sit there when I'm sitting in federal court waiting for a decision and waiting for all these different arguments being made. Does the judge just have one ruling and then he says, okay, I mean, you get the impression that maybe, oh, I'm going to do this if he says that. Is that really realistic?
No, I think more often than not, the judge knows what the sentence is going to be walking in. Remember, there's a whole separate purpose of the sentencing. It's to give a voice to the victims. It's to give a voice to the family members. It's to let all of them address the public, which they got to do. And that's accomplished no matter what the sentence is. But I don't really believe those events fundamentally moved the judge.
Can we talk about the acquitted conduct, the things that Combs was acquitted of? Much more serious charges. Does the judge take that into consideration, though, when sentencing him or any defendant on lesser charges?
Well, the judge had to walk a line here because you're not really supposed to consider the crimes on which he was acquitted. That would be manifestly unfair. But some of the conduct, like the violence against women, is still baked into and an underpinning of the charges he was convicted on, because it wasn't just transporting prostitutes across state lines. It was the acts that were committed when they got there, and some of those were real violent.
Now, we haven't heard as of yet as to whether he'd be walking out the door, but I would think it was almost inconceivable that he wouldn't just get the sentence beginning right now in a federal court, correct?
Right.
There would be no idea that sometimes you're let out on appeal. But
oh, no. He's not going to be let out on appeal. It's far too significant a crime for him to be let out on appeal. The sentence will be imposed. He will be incarcerated. Hopefully, he'll be moved to a real prison other than the holding center where he's been, and that should proceed.
Can we talk a little bit about the prosecution witness who testified under the pseudonym Mia? There was a lot of legal back and forth about whether she would be allowed to give a victim impact statement today. The judge ultimately agreed that she would be. She, at the last minute, decided not to, because she said the defense painted her as a liar and that she did not want to subject herself to that kind of treatment. Cassie Ventura wrote this letter to the judge saying she'll never feel safe if Combs is out of jail. Were these things contributory to the judge's final decision?
I don't know exactly what led to the judge's final decision, but I would think he might have been bothered by the sense that there was witness intimidation going on. You heard about that throughout this case, that it even continued once Sean Combs was in jail. And that kind of thing very much bothers any judge and would be considered.
You know, you're looking at this case right now. It's another case of celebrity. We've seen a lot of them. We have the Mangione case, which has sort of become a pseudo-celebrity almost. We see the people lining the courtroom outside. Has the way justice changed because of the way people are reacting to these big cases that are perhaps going all across the internet and all across the tweeting, et cetera, and so forth?
I get asked this question a lot, especially about Mangione, and I remind people Bonnie and Clyde had fans, right? But what they didn't have is the internet. They didn't have social media. They couldn't crowdsource, right, funding for their defense like people can now. There weren't all of these analysts, myself included, running around, content makers, you know, making a buck off of this stuff. So it's just become louder.
Yeah.
But those themes of support for people on trial, that's always been with us.
The Robin Hood robbing the bank,
Right.
Exactly. Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, etc.
Well, and speaking of content makers, we saw in our noon show, TikTokers, podcasters, you have all these influencers outside the courtroom. Their whole life is sort of covering this trial. And so because of that, the input, the speculation is even greater. I did want to ask you about one thing. You mentioned the judge cannot base his sentence on things for which the defendant was acquitted. However, he made it really clear you're only being sentenced for the offenses regarding the Mann Act. A lot of people may not know exactly what that is. Can you kind of explain what the Mann Act is and how that led to the sentence?
The Mann Act is a federal statute prohibiting transporting across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. That's what he was convicted of. He wasn't convicted of being a John or being a pimp or anything like that. He was, I'm sorry, he was convicted for transporting people across state lines to engage in prostitution.
But the bigger question here, I think, for the prosecution is that there was so much criticism of perhaps overreaching. Now that the sentence is out there, how do you rate how the prosecution, quote unquote, did? Because that's what they're thinking right now. Is this they're not pretty much not close to the sentence that they wanted either.
Yeah. Well, you have to keep in mind the prosecution went into this case looking to put Sean Combs in prison for the rest of his life. So he got a sentence of 50 months. And by the way, I think that's a victory for the defense team, right? 50 months, 4 years.
It's a little
He'll get
lower
credit
than the
for,
central, yeah.
It's lower than the sentencing guidelines.
Credit for time served.
He's credit for time served. Now you're 3 years. He might get some more credit if he keeps up the good conduct in jail. That's a win for the defense. And when you consider that the prosecution wanted him never to leave a prison for the rest of his life, it's actually a huge win.
So on that note, does this sentence, in your opinion, strike the balance between fairness and punishment?
Yes. I think it does. Well, first of all, you can tell because it's somewhat in the middle of what the defense suggested, which was 14 months, and what the prosecution suggested, which was 11 years. And everybody who looked at this thought we were going to end up in the middle. This is a little lower. I thought we were going to maybe get in that 70 to 87 month.
Well, he was pretty strong in his wording, the judge, this morning. We were all commenting. It seemed like maybe he was going to go toward that higher end.
Yeah, it did. It did. I thought maybe we would get the higher end. I thought it would be in that range. But, you know, another thing is 3 or 4 years in prison is no joke.
Right.
I mean, that is a significant sentence.
And he's been there already.
Right.
You know, he's been there. He's been wanting to get out. He couldn't get out. Just back to the judge for a second, though, because we do see federal judges sometimes give the big speech, say you did this, this, and this, and then you're like, wait a minute, it sounds like you were coming around and hitting him harder. The idea that we talked about, you know, the Cassie Ventura, the beating tape, etc. So even though that's not a part of the case, the defense against him, the case against him in the conviction, we still see that it might be part of the sentencing because the judge mentioned it, right?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, the violence against Cassie and Jane, because they are part of the Mann Act violations, so the violence does count. The judge can reference that and can look at that. And the general violence towards women.
And he did in his point, yeah.
And he was moved by that, and he should have been.
Talk to me a little bit about, so he fell within the sentencing guidelines. The judge went within the sentencing guidelines. What does it say for future cases involving high-profile defendants about how they will be treated?
Well, he fell lower, right? The guidelines were 70
oh, that's right, 5 to 7. 5 to 7.
Slight,
so
very slight, though.
Well, it's 20 months lower. I mean, that's almost 2 years lower.
But it's not 11, right? Yeah.
Right. Okay. So my question has even more merit then. So what does it say about powerful figures who are found guilty of these violations and then get less than the sentencing guidelines?
One thing it says, and I sort of hate to concede this, is that if you hire an excellent defense team, and this defense team was excellent and large and had no expense spared in getting witnesses and making arguments and making legal arguments, and they performed brilliantly, that is going to inure to your benefit.
And we also have an era now where people literally get cheering sections, going back to Mangione. Do you think that stuff, you know, especially federal court, they will always say it doesn't come in these doors. But I remember during the Trump case just last year, you could actually hear people outside when you were in the courtroom, people cheering outside. And you have to wonder whether that sound comes into the halls of justice.
Well, you worry about it affecting the jury much more than you worry about it affecting the judge. The judge will ordinarily say and will really try to treat each defendant the same. Human nature, though, if you have a case that's being watched, being reported on CBS every day,
right,
you know, you're going to maybe up your game a little bit or act a little bit differently. But I think this judge, Judge Subramanian, is excellent and did an excellent job in this case, whether or not you agree exactly with the results. But it's hard to keep out those voices.
Well,